She was certainly bold. Gaeshan had argued with his son that they should bring the young woman. He believed it would be disastrous if there were any poisonings during the trip. Eventually, he convinced the boy to agree. The Moon Prince had agreed without a second thought. He knew the apothecary would eventually acquiesce, even if it involved a lot of grumbling. Also, the doctor from the rear palace would be with them on at least half of the trip. The young woman seemed to think little of the doctor and his slight moustache, but Gaeshan knew they actually got along quite well. The real concern was what would happen in the western capital after they parted ways with the physician. It likely won't be easy for him, the emperor remarked. I wonder what flowers will gather to him. Gathering flowers, sire, an interesting choice of metaphor. Well, they would probably get angry if I compared them to insects. A glance at my garden should explain. He was just kidding, a joke he could make because they were not in the rear palace, nor the palace proper occupied by the Empress Dowager or the current Empress, but rather a villa beyond the imperial court. This villa was currently the residence of our duo, formerly one of the emperor's 4 ladies as well as his milk sibling, and a friend to him and Gaeshan when all of them were young. If the emperor looked a little lonely, perhaps it was because our duo was not here, for she too had gone to the west, and in the company of one particular person. The Moon Prince, meanwhile, was not as flowery as his appearance might suggest. Gaeshan had been with him since childhood. He had spent more time with him than either his mother or his father. He knew him better than anyone. The prince was a remarkably direct person, uninterested in ostentation. Even now that his time at the rear palace was over, they would still require his help and effort. Now he must serve as the emperor's younger brother. He would do all those things the sovereign who could not leave the capital could not do himself. So, a plague of insects. It was a natural disaster that could potentially bring an entire country to ruin. The sadness in the emperor's voice might have come from a feeling of his own powerlessness as ruler. This feeling existed at least in the eyes of his more superstitious subjects. He was the one who had decided to destroy the Shi clan. He had then chosen consort Gyokyu, one of the 4 ladies, to be his empress. Insect plagues often began with grasshoppers. These grasshoppers came on the wind from the west, from hundreds or even thousands of li away. The bugs would flourish in their new home. What started as a bit of a nuisance if left unchecked would grow into positive destruction in the years to come. Perhaps they were worrying too much, but they had to do something about it. It was the Prince of the Moon who had been entrusted with the task. This plague of insects would be a problem for more than just Li, however. If the grasshoppers came from the west, they would cause destruction there as well. Hunger drove people to desperation. Starving farmers would become bandits. As these troubles increased, they would eventually lay waste to the state. A wasted state would then try to steal from its richer neighbors. It had been the cause of many wars in times past. The Yi clan ruled the western regions, including Sei Shu, also known as the Western Yi province. They were exterminated decades earlier, during the reign of the Empress Regnant. Their own schemes led to their destruction. Now the area was ruled by Empress Gyokai's father. The man was currently without a clan name, but the emperor would likely bestow one upon him eventually. He had originally planned to give the family a name and then make Gyokyu his empress. If a war ever broke out, the West would be very important. He had chosen an empress from that region for that reason. He understood why some people thought the decision was too early. Gyokyu had already given him a princess and now a prince. The place might ordinarily belong to consort Lihua, but marriage was a political tool. Its use became more stringently dictated the higher one's position was. The emperor might stand at the zenith of his nation, yet even he sometimes had to consider what would please his father-in-law. The fact that he could be heard to grumble about all of this in Gaeshan's presence showed how much he trusted the man. The emperor playfully held up his wine cup and chuckled. It cannot hurt you to know from time to time your monarch's sufferings. He gazed up at the moon, then drained his cup in a single gulp. Gaeshan looked off into the distance, thinking mournfully of the lovely man who was now far to the west. To the northwest of Li, there was a country called Hokyuaran. It had many grainlands and forest resources. It also had a history of disagreements with Li. Pressure from Hokyuaran was the reason for the recent attacks by barbarian tribes against Li. There were no diplomatic relations between the two countries. They did not communicate directly. When they had contact with each other, it was always with a third country acting as intermediary. Why are we speaking of all this now? It is because of the Western capital, the place Maomao was heading to at that very moment. There, discussions would be held with important people from other countries. These people could offer indirect connections to Hokyuaran. Maomao never imagined they would be going to the Western capital. She felt like her jaw might drop clear through the floor when she was informed of their ultimate destination, after leaving the quack village behind. Reaching the Western capital would take more than 2 weeks of travel by carriage and boat. She began to worry about Chu Yu and Seizan, whom she had left behind. Then she decided they would manage. Her getting upset would not change anything, so she put it out of her mind. She would have to try to get Jinshi to spend as much money on her during the trip as possible. This was why she found herself being lectured about politics by a rather insistent Basin. Now that she thought about it, this wasn't the first time he had tried to explain such things. She realized he was actually pretty well educated, at least for what it was worth. It wasn't entirely respectful to think of it, but she didn't mind. She stifled a yawn and tried to listen. They had left the quack doctor and Maomao the cat back in the paper village. They had a long road ahead of them. Jinshi was still running around with the fake burn on his cheek. Perhaps he had grown fond of it. It was likely easier than wearing a mask every time they stopped at a roadside inn for the night. They had travelled far enough from the capital now that Maomao did not think anyone was likely to recognize the imperial younger brother. However, considering the trouble it would be to have every young lady on the street calling out to him as they walked along, she decided to leave well enough alone. Basin said, "We will stay in this village tonight." Maomao got out of the carriage, rubbing her behind. It was sore from sitting all day. The place was not so much a village as a small town built around an inn. But to Basin these rustic outposts were probably all the same. "Do not wander," he added. Maomao held out her hand. "I am going to buy provisions." She clearly meant that he should give her the money for them. "Are you even listening to me?" Basin demanded, glowering at her. However, someone else dropped a coin purse into Maomao's hand. It was Jinshi. Master Basin started, but he managed to stop himself before he said Master Jinshi. The bodyguards with them seemed to think Basin was the master. "I will accompany her," Jinshi said in his altered voice. Son of a Maomao thought, glaring at the young man with the burn. She had been hoping for a chance to relax. "Are they selling anything interesting?" Jinshi asked, whispering in her ear so no one else would overhear him. His voice was beautiful and threatened to give her goosebumps, but it also contained an almost boyish curiosity. It reminded Maomao of the last time they had gone to a city market together. People who were raised in luxury got excited about the strangest things. "It appears hemp production is a major industry here," Maomao replied. Hemp seemed to be the main material used for the people's clothing. Perhaps it was not enough to keep them warm, so many also wore animal skins. Flax seeds were used in the bread sold in the bakeries as well. The area also produced oil, it seemed. She could see pots filled with a viscous liquid. That person nearby might be the oil maker smoking a pipe. Maomao noticed he was smoking dried hemp leaves and frowned. "What is it?" "Nothing. I just think perhaps he is smoking too much." The hemp plant could be used in small amounts as medicine. However, smoking it every day could cause an addiction, and Maomao would not recommend it. It was similar to opium. It could be medicinal if used sparingly, but toxic in larger quantities. Jinshi said teasingly, "So there are toxins even you won't touch." Maomao looked annoyed. "Addictive substances are not to be trifled with. There is no way to get the poison out of your system. Even if you want to quit, doing so is harder than getting out from under the covers on a cold winter morning." "You think so?" "That is not so difficult if the room is warm." "Shit, that is right." He did not understand common metaphors, Maomao realized. No doubt Jinshi's old attendant lit a brazier to warm the room before he woke. What an awful master he was, to run his old servant Sugen ragged that way. And when he didn't even understand the effort involved, Maomao found herself inadvertently scowling at him. "Ah, now there's a look I haven't seen in a while," Jinshi said, not at all bothered. In fact, he looked so gratified that Maomao wondered if he was quite all right. If Gaeshan were here, he would certainly be pressing his hand to his forehead and giving Maomao a significant look. Jinchi's current companion, Basin, did not have that opportunity. He was busy making preparations at the moment. They would be heading into a much drier region. They needed horses that were accustomed to the environment. They had been changing horses every day, but this would involve a new type of horse. The town was small, with only a few dozen houses around a large inn. A highway passed through the area, and they could supposedly obtain the animals there. It would take some time to gather enough horses for the carriage and all the bodyguards. Maomao said, looking at the bread displayed at a storefront. Personally, I am more interested in buying provisions. Much of the bread was fried, likely because of the local oil production. It was a fried and twisted dough treat known as mahua, or hemp flour. It was a most appropriate name. A sign by the bread proclaimed includes flax seeds. The fried dough would keep a long time, and more importantly, Jinchi was obviously very interested in it. I wonder if it will suit a noble's tastes. Maomao was skeptical, but she turned to the old man who was industriously working his dough. "One please," she said. "Sure thing, but wouldn't you like a second one to go with it? If it's good." Maomao took the mahua, which was wrapped in a bamboo leaf, and took a bite. The bread was freshly made, still soft and hot. She chewed carefully to avoid burning herself. Jinchi looked at her. "What, not going to share?" she asked. "I am testing it for poison," she said deadpan. It was good that the bread was fresh and there was enough for everyone. There were too many, actually, to wrap them all in bamboo leaves, so the shopkeeper gave her a rough-hewn sack. It was made of hemp fiber, of course, and he lined the inside with cheap paper. This was to keep the grease from soaking through. Jinchi plucked one of the mahua and took a bite. "It is all right," he declared. If it had been better than what he normally ate, it would have been time to find a new royal chef. "Do you really have time to be out here playing, Master Jinchi?" Basin looked rather tired after everything that happened at the papermaker's village. "Having me away for a while will give him a chance to rest." Basin was not a very good liar. It must have been tiring for him to pretend to be Jinchi's superior. In that respect, he wasn't so different from his father. As they walked, Maomao spotted a number of other interesting things. As they traveled farther west, they saw more animal husbandry. This meant dairy products became more readily available. She examined a shelf filled with these items in a storehouse. An older woman who appeared to be a housewife was tending a fire in a stove. The main post in the kitchen had a strange pattern. Each land had its different faiths. Here it appeared they worshipped snakes, or at least the pattern suggested that. Jinchi raised an eyebrow as she looked at it. "Excuse me," Maomao said to the woman. "Yes," she replied. "Could we ask for a few of these?" "We can pay you." They tended to grow tired of portable rations after a while. Maomao wanted to indulge herself and her party, at least for the few days the fresh dairy products would last. "HRM, which ones did you have in mind?" The woman eyed Maomao and Jinchi closely. "This one, and those ones." "Perhaps 10 of each, and if you have anything else interesting we will take it." "Just a second," the woman said. She fetched the items off the shelf and put them in a hemp package. "How about that?" She had looked like she might drive a hard bargain, but she let them have the food at a surprisingly cheap price. She had even picked good, fresh items. "I know we are imposing." "I really appreciate this," Maomao said earnestly. The woman broke into a smile. "You never know when the gods might be watching. There's one right here after all," she said, indicating the post. Maomao thought. She didn't necessarily doubt the belief. She only worried that the woman's generosity might lead to her being taken advantage of. "So you worship a snake here," she noted. "That's right," the woman replied. "Years when a white snake appears are sure to have a good harvest. It might be superstition, but Jinchi's face darkened at the remark. He had no doubt heard the stories about the White Lady. Perhaps he had even been assigned to handle her. Maomao wished he would maintain a little more distance while she spoke with the woman. Because of his burn and his serious expression, the woman kept giving him curious glances. Maomao did not dislike snakes, but the mention of white snakes in particular tended to bring a frown to her face. She could not help wondering where the mysterious immortal had gone. "It looks like you two are headed west. Best be careful," the woman said as she packaged the dairy delicately. There was more in there than Maomao had specifically ordered, a little something extra perhaps as a kindness. Why is that? I hear there have been a lot of bandits along the highway in that direction lately. Even the merchants do not go that way unless they have to. Ah, perhaps she normally sold these provisions to the merchants, but with fewer customers than usual, it was better to give Maomao and Jinshi a bargain than not to sell them at all. And the free goods would remove a few more items from her shelf. I see. Thank you, Maomao said. We will be careful. Then she looked at Jinshi to signal that they should return. When they reached the inn, the scent of aromatic tea filled the air. It was Basin, relaxing for a moment after arranging the horses. When he saw Jinshi, he straightened up. The animals will be ready by tomorrow morning, he reported. We will have to use one of the local guides, though. He meant one of the cargo transport businesses that used horses to move goods. Fine, Jinshi said, slumping into a chair. Basin looked at Maomao, clearly telling her to hurry and make tea. She shrugged and started to get fresh hot water. Then Jinshi said, "It is all right, I do not mind lukewarm tea." "Are you sure, sir?" If he said so, then it was fine. There was still plenty of water in the teapot. Maomao simply added some new leaves. "We heard something about bandits," Jinshi said, sipping the tepid drink. "Yes, sir, the same thing was mentioned to me. That is why we had to bring one of the guides with us as a condition of renting the horses. Banditry could take many forms. In this case, they seemed to be the type who wanted to collect a toll. If the party did not run into them, well and good. But if they did, having someone along who knew the local situation would likely see them escape by simply paying a percentage of their cargo." Maomao looked at Jinshi and Basin. Both were effectively trained soldiers, and as government officials they couldn't simply ignore the banditry. However, they didn't have enough forces here to completely eliminate the criminals. Neither of them looked very happy about it. Maomao, for her part, simply hoped they wouldn't even see the brigands. Chapter 11 Bandits. If there are any bandits about, I reckon they will be showing up around here, their guide said. His accent was so thick it almost sounded like he was doing it on purpose. He pointed to a spot on the sheepskin map. It was a pass between two mountain ranges. It was the sort of place that practically begged for an encirclement. They are not all stupid. They won't go out of their way to get themselves hurt. If you leave about half of your goods, they should let you pass. We only meet them about once every 3 times anyway. That is interesting. At that rate, the merchants would consider using this route. They know they will not be attacked every time. Taking the long way around requires greater time and expense. Just think of it as a bit of an expensive toll, good sirs. Anyhow, people say those bandits are the righteous kind of thieves. Basin asked, unable to hide a note of indignation in his voice. Righteous thieves. Maomao worried whether he would be able to hold himself back if they encountered the outlaws. Jinshi seemed to have taken a liking to the dry country horses and preferred to ride instead of taking the carriage. Basin had no choice but to travel on horseback. This meant Maomao could have the spacious carriage all to herself. She moved some of the luggage to make a spot to sleep on the floor. Sitting for a long time made her backside sore. She thought lying down might help. Maomao firmly believed that worrying about whether something would happen was a waste of valuable time. She determined to go to sleep. If she was truly lucky, by the time she woke up they would have passed the bandits' checkpoint. Sadly, she was not lucky. Before they had made it halfway across the mountains, Maomao found herself tumbling around inside the carriage. The horses whinnied and the vehicle came to a sudden halt. Forcing her sleepy eyes to stay open and rubbing her back where she had bumped it, Maomao looked outside. There were no raiders, but the guide appeared to be explaining something to Basin. "What's going on?" Maomao asked the driver. It looks like another carriage ahead of ours was attacked by bandits. It is probably best to wait here for a while. In other words, they were hoping that by holding station for a few minutes, they could get away without anything happening to them. Someone who had escaped the attack on the other carriage was there, asking Basin for help. Maomao could not tell what the man was saying, but Basin seemed to be managing to hold his anger in check. That is, until the newcomer showed something to him and Jinshi, and they both went pale. Jinshi grabbed it and looked at it closely. Maomao was curious, so she got out of the carriage, even though her hair was still messy from bed, or perhaps it was from the floor. Before she could walk over to Jinshi, Basin set his horse galloping. Jinchi instructed several of his bodyguards to follow the young man. By the time he gave the order, Basin was already out of sight. "You've been asleep," Jinchi remarked. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean," Maomao said innocently. "There is a weird pattern on your cheek." "Anyway, what is going on?" she asked, rubbing her cheek with her hand. Jinchi silently showed her what the other man had brought. It was a wooden tag branded with an insignia in the shape of a flower. Maomao recognized the crest. Each of the consorts at the rear palace was given one, but who did this one belong to? Jinchi said the carriage that was attacked was Lady Arduo's. What was she doing here? Maomao thought. However, this was hardly the time for questions. How had she ended up getting attacked anyway? Arduo seemed like someone who would know perfectly well how to bribe bandits. She would know better than to needlessly antagonize them. Jinchi said Consort Lishu is with her. That answered some of Maomao's questions, but it also made her substantially more anxious.